Why is it that so many of us pride ourselves on being good listeners, yet still struggle to create truly meaningful connections with the women in our lives? You nod, you maintain eye contact, you make all the right sounds at all the right times, yet somehow the conversations remain surface level, predictable, and frankly, one-sided. You've been told your whole life that listening is the key to connection. Just listen more, they say. Women want to be heard, they insist. And while there's truth in that advice, it's only part of the story, a partial solution that leaves you stuck in a pattern of passive engagement that ultimately limits how deep your connections can really go. Think about it. How many times have you found yourself in a conversation where you're doing everything right as a listener, but she still doesn't fully open up? The conversation stays polite, pleasant even, but never crosses that threshold into genuine vulnerability and authentic sharing. There's a wall there, invisible but impenetrable, and being a better passive listener won't break through it. The problem isn't that you're not listening enough. The problem is that you're only listening. When you position yourself as just a listener, you create an unbalanced dynamic. She becomes the performer, the content creator, while you become the audience, the consumer. This might feel safe for you, but it places all the vulnerability burden on her shoulders. Why would anyone continuously make themselves vulnerable to someone who never reciprocates? You see, true connection isn't built on one person sharing, while the other absorbs. It's built on mutual exchange, a dance of vulnerability and disclosure that goes both ways. The deeper truth that nobody tells you is that to get her to open up more, you must open up first. This realization hit me years ago during a relationship where conversations felt like pulling teeth. I was doing all the right listening things, nodding, paraphrasing, asking follow-up questions, but she still kept most of her thoughts and feelings locked away. It wasn't until I started sharing more of myself, my doubts, my fears, my embarrassing stories, that something shifted. Suddenly, she began matching my level of openness, and our conversations transformed from polite exchanges to genuine connections. What I discovered was a psychological principle that relationship researchers have known for decades. Self-disclosure tends to be reciprocal. When one person reveals something personal, the other often feels both the permission and the subtle obligation to share something of similar depth in return. Psychologists call this disclosure reciprocity, and understanding it changes everything about how we approach conversations. But here's where most men get it wrong. They hear this advice and immediately start oversharing, dumping their life story, deepest insecurities, or childhood traumas within minutes of meeting someone. That's not vulnerability, that's overwhelming. What works instead is progressive, appropriate self-disclosure that gently invites similar sharing from her. So what does this look like in practice? How do you move from being just a listener to someone who creates the conditions for her to truly open up? First, you need to understand the ladder of self-disclosure. At the bottom, a rung of facts, impersonal, objective information that carries little emotional risk. I grew up in Chicago, or I studied engineering in college. These are safe, but they don't create much connection. The next rung involves opinions and preferences, subjective judgments that begin revealing your perspective. I think Chicago winters are beautiful, despite their harshness. Or, I chose engineering because I love solving puzzles. Higher up are feelings and experiences that reveal more about your inner world. Moving away from Chicago was harder than I expected. I still miss watching the lake during storms. Or, engineering school taught me I'm more creative than analytical, which challenged my self-image. At the top are vulnerabilities, fears, and dreams, the things that expose your true self. Sometimes I worry I chose career stability over genuine passion, or I dream of building something that outlasts me, but I'm afraid of taking the necessary risks. The art of connection is knowing how to climb this ladder at the right pace, not rushing to the top immediately, but also not staying at the bottom rungs where real connection rarely happens. Start by matching her current level of disclosure, then occasionally step one rung higher, creating space for her to follow if she feels comfortable. When she shares something at the level of facts, respond with a relevant fact about yourself, then perhaps add an opinion or preference that connects to what she shared. When she offers an opinion, acknowledge it, share a related opinion of your own, then perhaps add a feeling or experience that explains why you hold that view. The key is what I call disclosure leapfrog, taking turns moving the conversation deeper, but never jumping so far ahead that it creates discomfort. And crucially, you must be willing to occasionally lead this dance by being the first to step up to the next level of openness. But there's something else that makes this approach powerful, something beyond the mere exchange of information. When you disclose something meaningful about yourself, you're demonstrating trust. You're essentially saying, I trust you enough to share this part of myself. That gift of trust often inspires reciprocal trust in return. Remember though, effective self-disclosure isn't just about depth, it's also about relevance. Your sharing should connect to what she's shared or the current conversation thread. Random vulnerable admissions that have no connection to the present discussion feel jarring and self-centered rather than inviting. Let me give you a concrete example. If she mentions she's been stressed at work lately but doesn't elaborate, instead of just saying, that sounds tough, and waiting for more, you might say, I can relate to work stress. Last month, I was so overwhelmed with a project that I couldn't sleep for days. I kept thinking I wasn't good enough to handle it. Do you ever find yourself thinking that way when you're stressed? See what happened there? You shared a specific experience, admitted a vulnerability, fear of inadequacy, and then asked a question that invited her to explore her experience at a similar depth if she chooses to. Another powerful approach is using what I call universal vulnerability, sharing thoughts and feelings that most humans experience but rarely discuss. Things like feeling like an imposter sometimes, worrying about whether you're on the right path in life, or struggling to balance different priorities. These admissions are relatable enough to feel safe, yet personal enough to create genuine connection. Now, I need to address something important. Authentic self-disclosure requires actual self-awareness. You can't share meaningfully about yourself if you haven't done the work of understanding your own emotions, motivations, and patterns. Many men struggle with emotional literacy, the ability to identify and articulate what they're feeling beyond basic labels like good or bad. If that's you, the work begins with developing a richer emotional vocabulary and practicing internal reflection. Start paying attention to the nuances of your emotional experiences. Are you just angry, or are you frustrated, disappointed, embarrassed, or threatened? Are you simply happy, or are you grateful, proud, relieved, or hopeful? The more precisely you can name your emotions, the more meaningfully you can share them. I also want to clarify something crucial. Becoming more self-disclosing doesn't mean you stop being a good listener. Quite the opposite. Effective self-disclosure enhances your listening because it transforms the conversation from an interview into a genuine exchange. You're still fully present for what she shares, but now you're present as a fellow human rather than just an audience. What about timing? When is the right moment to shift from listening to sharing? Look for natural openings in the conversation, moments where she's finished expressing a thought and where your disclosure would build upon what's been shared rather than redirecting the conversation. The transition should feel natural, not forced. And remember, your goal isn't to match her story for story or to one-up her experiences. The point is to create a sense of mutual understanding. Sometimes, the most powerful response to her disclosure is simply acknowledging the emotion behind it and sharing that you felt something similar, even if the circumstances were different. There's something profoundly validating about hearing, I felt that way too, from someone who then briefly illustrates their understanding through a personal example. It transforms the conversation from one person being seen to both people recognizing themselves in each other. At this point, you might be wondering about balance. How much should you share versus listen? While there's no perfect ratio, research suggests that balanced conversations where both parties disclose at similar rates tend to be rated as most satisfying. But more important than counting minutes is ensuring that both people feel heard and understood. The beauty of becoming more self-disclosing is that it transforms not just your conversations, but your experience of them. When you're only listening, conversations can start to feel like work. You're constantly focusing on what questions to ask next or how to keep her talking. But when you share authentically too, conversations become energizing rather than depleting.